It is our job now to make sure we hear what we have to say, as well as include Latinos at every important conversations. Latinos deserve a seat at every table. Hispanics really are the builders of the future, both for our community and for our country. We are already making an incredible impact on this country and in the world. You heard it through the cultural impact earlier. But it is also true in the economic power that we represent, as well as our presence in the workforce. There will be no hiring, no growth, no training without Latinos. So let's dive into that a bit more with our friend Hugo Lopez at Pew Research.
My name is Hugo Lopez, and I'm the Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C. I want to talk to you today about some of the findings we've had around Latinos, both in terms of demographics recently. There's been some changes, and also about the situation of Latinos in the labor market. But first, about the Pew Research Center. We're a nonpartisan, non-advocacy organization. We take no positions on policy, and I just wanted to be clear about that because we don't endorse any recommendations. But first, some demography. The nation's Hispanic population has reached almost 63 million people. This is according to the latest population estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau. But one thing to note here is that the 2020 census, which came in with around 62 million Latinos counted, did have an undercount of about 5% of the nation's Hispanic population. That translates into about 3 million or so folks. And so these numbers, while impressive and continue to show rapid growth of the nation's Hispanic population, are an undercount of what the true number of Hispanics living in the nation is. But with all that said, though, there are some other interesting patterns that the 2020 census revealed. One of the first key ones is the states in which Latinos live in the fastest growing states. So California, Texas, and Florida together have about half of the nation's Hispanic population. But states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Louisiana, during the last decade have had the fastest growth in their Hispanic populations. Admittedly, the populations in some of these states are relatively small. We're talking tens of thousands of Latinos living in those states, but they are the fastest growing states, which is an important part of the story and the ongoing story of the dispersion and growth of the nation's Hispanic population. Also, that growth is really interesting because while places like California and Los Angeles County, for example, continue to have the largest populations of Hispanics, you also see that the growth at the county level across the nation in the Hispanic population is actually distributed in places where we have traditionally not had many Hispanics. This is a continuation of the story that we've seen for the last 2 to 3 decades, and the last decade was no different. But as you can see, places in the Northeast, in the South, and in the Midwest have had some of the fastest county level Hispanic population growth in the last 10 years. I want to talk, though, about the economic situation of Latinos, and Latinos particularly around the job market. There's been some really good news lately, and that is that the Hispanic unemployment rate is now reaching near record lows. In July of this year, the unemployment rate, according to the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, was 4.2%. That's above the 3.8% for the nation as a whole, but the nation's Hispanic unemployment rate has come way down from where it was at its peak during the April 2020 COVID-19 shutdown. This is good news for Latinos because Latinos are also seeing that we have a record number of Hispanics working in the labor force, and Latinos as a representative share of the nation's labor force is now reaching record levels. So for example, in July of 2022, nearly 30 million Latino workers were employed in the United States. That's more than was the case in December of 2019, which was the last peak, and it also makes up about 18% of all employed Americans. And among the unemployed, we also see that the nation's Hispanic workers who are unemployed, that number is at 1.3 million in July of 2022. However, that is down from a peak of 5 million plus in April of 2020, and about 20%, about 1 in 5 of all Americans are Latino. To put that percentage in perspective, the nation's Hispanic population makes up about 19, almost 20% of the nation's total population. So Latinos are well represented in the nation's labor force. Finally, despite some of this success, we've also found that at least in this century, at least in the last 2 decades, we've seen some Latinos, particularly middle-income Latinos, slipping in the income tier. That is, falling from the upper income tier into the middle income tier, or from the middle income tier into the lower income tier. And this is something that's more likely to happen among Hispanic households than it is among white households or Asian households. As you can see, the share of Latinos who moved from the middle income tier to the lower income tier was about 21% between 2000 and 2021, favorable one. We've also found that among issues, it is economic issues that are at the top of mind for Latinos this year. Inflation, particularly, is an important concern for them, particularly inflation around food and consumer goods, and inflation around gas and energy prices. You can find our work at pewresearch.org, and you can follow me as well at Hugo Lopez on Twitter. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our conversation.